The Galactic Empire, for all its might and pride, had long since forgotten the name of humanity. It was a relic of the past, buried under centuries of galactic conquest and political maneuvering. Once, Earth had been the jewel of the galaxy, a planet full of life, history, and ambition. But after a cataclysmic war of their own making, the humans were believed to have wiped themselves out, leaving nothing behind but ruin. The Empire moved on, turning its focus to conquering new worlds, never thinking that the human race could rise from the ashes. But the past, it seemed, had a way of returning when least expected. Over the dense, neon-lit skies of Viral Prime, one of the Empire's most prestigious worlds, something happened, something that tore at the fabric of reality itself. It wasn't a typical sight, no arrival from a distant system, no hyperspace tear, no distant hum of interstellar engines. It was just there, out of nowhere. A colossal warship, impossibly massive, appeared in the atmosphere, black, jagged, and covered in deep scars like it had weathered every battle the galaxy had ever known. It was not a ship built by any known species, certainly not by the Empire. No insignia, no markings, not even a faint signature of heat or energy, just an ominous, suffocating silence. The Empire's best ships, the ones that patrolled the edges of their empire, had no warning systems that could detect it, not until it was too late. The warship hovered above the city, a shadow of doom hanging over the people below. In the imperial capital, Emperor Kree stood in his high tower, his eyes wide with disbelief. His 3 hearts beat erratically, his claws twitched. "What is that?" he muttered, his voice low and almost a whisper. A deep, guttural hiss of disbelief escaped his throat. Behind him, his military advisors scrambled for an answer, speaking over each other in a desperate attempt to make sense of the impossible. It's not possible," High Marshal Torrin stammered, his face pale. "We're picking up some strange readings. It looks like a human vessel." Kree's eyes narrowed in fury. "Human? Impossible. Humanity was eradicated a century ago. They were wiped out. Their worlds burned, their colonies erased. We crushed them." Torrin looked nervous, but he stood his ground. "Sir, we have to consider that this ship could be human, even if it doesn't match anything in the records. It's a warship, and it's massive. Whatever it is, it's not a rogue ship." The Emperor's voice was cold, calculating. "Impossible," he repeated. "I'll believe it when I see it. But for now, we have bigger issues. We need to know what it wants." Before anyone could respond, the warship moved. Not with the slow, lumbering momentum of traditional vessels. No, this ship moved like a predator, silent and deadly. The ship didn't accelerate in the usual sense, but simply shifted, its massive frame gliding through the stars as though it were part of the void itself. There were no engine flames, no signals. Just the eerie sensation that it had always been there. The Imperial fleet's response was swift, alarmed, disorganized. Some ships fired, others hesitated, unsure of what to do. But hesitation proved fatal. A single pulse erupted from the warship's belly. It was silent, unseen, faster than any missile. Within seconds, 3 Imperial cruisers vanished, disintegrated, as if they had never existed in the first place. No explosion, no fragments, just a quiet, empty void where once there was a fleet. Panic swept through the Empire like wildfire. "Are you seeing this?" an officer shouted, his voice trembling. The warship floated above, untouched by the chaos below, a menacing reminder of something the Empire had long forgotten. "We need to open a communication channel," Torrin said, his voice barely a whisper. "We need to know if there's any chance we can talk to them, make them understand. Maybe they're just rogue AIs, something from Earth's old tech." Kree's scales tightened in frustration. "Talk? You want us to talk to that? You think they'll listen?" His voice turned icy. "No, Torin, whatever it is, it's not here for peace. It's here to remind us that we are not invincible." The Empire had no answers. Not yet. And then, as if in answer to their frantic communications, the warship did something even more chilling. It didn't speak, it didn't communicate. It simply sent one message, not in words, not in sound, but in a single image. A human face, worn, ancient, cold, marked by time and hardship. Underneath the face, 4 words flashed across every screen across the Empire. "We never left. Remember." A single, brief message. But it was enough. The Empire was no longer sure of what it was facing. The image of that face haunted the Empire. For days it lingered in the minds of every leader, every soldier, every citizen. That single cold stare accompanied by those 4 chilling words, "We never left. Remember." It echoed across the galaxy, reverberating through the darkest corners of the Empire's sprawling reach. For the first time in over 100 years, there was uncertainty. Fear began to creep into the hearts of the Empire's elite. The whispers in the Senate chambers were no longer of victory and domination, but of doubt, of the return of something that the galaxy had long believed extinct. Emperor Kree, once a creature of absolute confidence, found himself pacing the cold, metallic floors of the Citadel's spire, his claws scraping against the polished surface with an unsettling rhythm. His heartbeats were no longer in sync, a sign of the unease that gripped him. He had built his empire from the ashes of countless wars, from the smoldering ruins of civilizations who had dared to challenge his authority. And yet, standing here, faced with the unknown, he felt powerless. Torin, the High Marshal, stood by the Emperor's side, his expression grave. "Your Eminence, we've made attempts to trace the origin of the ship. The fleet has scoured every inch of the sector, but it doesn't leave a trace. It's as if it appeared from nowhere." Kree didn't respond immediately. His mind was racing, calculating, running through every possible scenario. Could this be some kind of advanced technology, a remnant of the human species they had thought wiped out? Number that couldn't be. Humans were gone. They had disappeared after the Great Collapse, their colonies vanishing one by one, their history erased from imperial archives. If any remnants of humanity still existed, they were mere ghosts, nothing more than a myth told in hushed tones. Could it be a trap? Torin asked hesitantly, his eyes darting to the Emperor for any sign of approval. "It's not a trap," Kree spat. This is something worse. It's a message, Torin, and we've ignored it for too long." The room fell silent, the air thick with tension. The image of the human face, old, cold, weary, flashed in their minds again. The Emperor stood motionless, staring out into the dark expanse of space, his thoughts consumed by the ship, the message, and the impossible truth that loomed just beyond his reach. Could it really be true? Could humanity have survived hiding in the vastness of space, waiting for the right moment to strike? The silence was broken by a harsh chime, followed by an urgent message from the command center. "Your Eminence," the voice crackled through the comms, "a new development. The warship has moved." Kree's heart skipped a beat. His gaze snapped to Torin. "What do you mean, moved?" The officer on the other end of the line continued. "It's no longer hovering above Viral Prime. It's moved beyond the range of our sensors, but it's still in the system, and it's sending out something." "What?" Kree barked. "It's broadcasting a signal, sir. It's not a normal transmission. We can't decipher it, but it's not like anything we've ever encountered. It seems to be a message, a warning." The voice trembled as the realization sank in. "It's directed at us." The Emperor's blood ran cold. His mind flashed back to the haunting image, the face of someone who had survived everything, who had been forced to watch as the Empire swept across the stars, crushing all resistance, a face marked by war. The words burned in his memory. "We never left. Remember." "Prepare the fleet," Kree ordered, his voice suddenly sharp. "I want all long-range ships in position. This ends now." The Empire moved quickly. For all its flaws, the Imperial military was a well-oiled machine, capable of swift and decisive action. But despite their rapid response, a sense of dread hung over the command centers. The fleet assembled near the outer edges of the system, preparing for an engagement they could not understand. The unknown warship had no clear origin, no clear motive, but its power was undeniable. The Empire had already lost 4 cruisers in the blink of an eye. What would happen if they went to war with it? Emperor Kree sat in his command room, staring at the massive holographic display that showed the position of every ship in the fleet. His claws twitched nervously, his golden eyes flickering with anger and fear. The face of the human, the one who had left that warning, had become a symbol of everything the Empire feared. The thought of facing a force so powerful, so alien that it had never been seen before. It was more than just a threat. It was an affront, an invasion of the very core of the Empire's identity. "We cannot risk an all-out confrontation," Torrin said, breaking the silence in the room. His voice was steady, but there was a tremor beneath it. "If this is truly a human vessel, then we must prepare for the worst. We know nothing about their capabilities, their technology, their weapons. Everything we thought we knew may be wrong." Kree slammed his fist onto the table. "We do not negotiate with the unknown. We do not beg for answers. If they are here to challenge us, then we will crush them just like any other threat." "Your Eminence," a voice from the back of the room interrupted. "We've intercepted another transmission. It's not a threat. It's a broadcast. It's coming from the warship itself." "Play it," Kree ordered, his voice strained with impatience. The room fell into silence as the transmission began. The screens flickered, showing static, then a clear image appeared. A face, not the same one from the earlier transmission, but a human face all the same. This one was younger, though still hardened by the scars of battle. The message was simple, chilling. "You've been warned." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving the room in stunned silence. The words hung in the air like a dark omen. It was a statement, not a question. There was no room for negotiation, no room for peace. The humans weren't just sending a message. They were declaring their presence, staking their claim. The Empire was no longer safe. "Activate the orbital defenses," Kree growled. "Prepare the fleet for full engagement. We are not being intimidated." But even as the orders left his mouth, a deep unease gnawed at his insides. The Empire's might had been unquestionable for centuries. It had never faced a force like this before, and despite their immense power, something inside Kree told him that this time the Empire might not emerge victorious. As the fleet positioned itself, the warship, the mysterious human vessel, remained unmoving, like a predator, waiting for its prey to make the first move. It hovered in the void, silent and still, its intentions unclear, but its presence undeniable. Somewhere on the command deck of that warship, a figure stood watching, waiting. The humans had returned, not as victims, not as refugees, but as a force to be reckoned with. And the Empire, for the first time in centuries, was about to feel the weight of their mistake. The Empire's defenses were deployed in record time. Dozens of massive warships, their hulls bristling with weapons, hovered above Viral Prime, their engines humming with the promise of destruction. The sky was lit with the brilliant glow of their energy shields as they locked onto the mysterious warship, which floated just beyond their reach, unmoving. It had become a symbol of defiance, silent, menacing, like an ancient predator biding its time. Emperor Kree paced in his command center, unable to shake the feeling that they were about to make a grave mistake. Every plan he had ever executed, every conquest he had overseen, had relied on overwhelming force, certainty, and speed. But this was different. This was something beyond his understanding. It wasn't just a ship. It was a message. It was a warning. And yet, the Empire had no idea who or what was behind it. Have we found any weakness? Kree's voice was low, sharp. His golden eyes glowed with intensity as he addressed his officers. One of the senior officers, a grizzled veteran with scars across his face, spoke up. "We've analyzed every possible vulnerability, Your Eminence. There's no sign of damage, no weak points. Whatever this ship is, it's unlike anything we've encountered. Our weapons systems barely scratched it before." Kree turned away, frustration mounting. "I don't need excuses, I need answers. The Empire cannot be made to kneel before an unknown force. Prepare the fleet for an all-out assault. I want every weapon at our disposal targeting that warship. We will obliterate it before it can make another move." High Marshal Torrin, standing nearby, shifted uncomfortably. "Your Eminence, we've already seen what happens when we engage it recklessly. 4 of our cruisers were reduced to nothing in seconds. It's not a normal ship. It's beyond anything we've ever faced." The Emperor's claws dug into the armrests of his throne. His scales flickered with subtle irritation. "Then what do you suggest, Torrin? Do you think we should just sit here and wait for it to destroy us all?" Torrin took a deep breath, stepping forward with a calculated expression. "No, but I think it's time we start thinking differently. Perhaps it's not just a matter of brute force. Perhaps we need to understand what they want. If they're humans—" "Humans!" Kree barked, his voice rising. "You still believe that? After everything we've done? After their colonies were wiped out, their species extinguished? Don't you dare tell me they've survived. It's a ghost ship, a remnant of a forgotten race that has no place in the future of this galaxy, no place in the Empire." Torrin didn't flinch. "Perhaps, but we have no choice but to act as if they are real. We cannot afford to underestimate them." For a long moment the Emperor said nothing. The tension in the room was thick, the only sound the hum of the warship's engines and the occasional chime of a console alert. It was as though the very air was holding its breath. But Kree knew something had shifted. The Empire had always been untouchable, indestructible. But now, in the face of something so foreign, so unpredictable, the Empire was beginning to unravel. "We open a channel to it," Kree finally muttered. His voice was quiet, yet resolute. "One final attempt to understand what it wants." Torrin hesitated. "You think it will respond?" "I don't care whether it responds or not," the Emperor snapped. "I want to hear it. I want the galaxy to hear what they have to say before we destroy them." Elsewhere in the vastness of space, the warship remained motionless, its ominous black hull a stark contrast against the stars. It had not moved an inch since the previous transmission. It did not respond to any of the Empire's countless communications, but it had no need to. It had already made its point. Inside the ship, the crew remained silent, the vast command deck a sea of quiet tension. The ship's captain, a figure who had been part of humanity's last struggle, stared out into the void. The only sound was the soft hum of the ship's systems, the distant thrum of engines powered by technology that defied the Empire's understanding. The captain's thoughts were focused on the mission at hand. The message had been delivered. The Empire would be forced to respond. There was no fear, no hesitation. The humans aboard this ship had been waiting for this moment for decades. The Empire had thought them gone, erased from the history books. But the truth was different. Humanity had never left. It had simply bided its time, waiting for the right moment to strike. The captain turned to one of the officers at the helm. "Prepare to respond," he said. His voice was calm, unwavering. "Make sure they hear this. Make sure the entire galaxy hears it." The officer nodded, fingers flying across the controls, sending out another transmission, this one directed at every Imperial ship within range. Back on Viral Prime, the Empire's command room was in chaos. The communication lines buzzed with frantic activity. The fleet had been ordered to prepare for an assault, but now the situation was different. The ship, which had been hovering above the planet, was beginning to move again. Slowly at first, but its movement was deliberate. It was not retreating, it was advancing. "Your Eminence," one of the officers called out, "the warship is moving. It's approaching our main fleet." Kree's heart raced. On screen, now. The holographic display flickered to life, showing the warship as it glided effortlessly toward the heart of the Empire's military might. The surrounding Imperial ships took defensive positions, weapons primed and ready, but the human warship was unfazed. It moved with terrifying grace, an apex predator stalking its prey. The silence that surrounded it seemed to hang heavy in the air, adding to the tension that was now choking the room. "We have no choice now," Torrin said, his voice barely a whisper. "It's come to a point where we must act." Kree nodded. "Prepare the fleet. We engage them now. Now." The orders were given, and the Imperial fleet surged forward, weapons blazing with energy that could obliterate entire moons. The warship, though, didn't respond. It didn't fire back. It simply continued its slow approach as though it were waiting for something. And then, as the Empire's ships closed in, the warship finally did something. Without warning, it emitted a burst of energy so powerful that it sent shockwaves rippling through the fabric of space itself. The first wave of Imperial cruisers closest to the warship were engulfed in a blinding light, an energy pulse so powerful that the ships seemed to disintegrate before their crews could even comprehend what was happening. There was no explosion, no debris, just nothing. The fleet halted in its tracks. The survivors, now scattered across the blackness of space, watched in stunned disbelief as the human warship remained untouched, unharmed by their barrage. "Impossible!" Torrin muttered, his eyes wide with horror. Kree's claws clenched, his mind racing. Fire again! Fire everything! But before the next volley could even be launched, the warship responded again. This time the pulse of energy wasn't a burst, but a focused beam, one that shot out with unerring precision, cutting through the heart of one of the Empire's largest dreadnoughts. The dreadnought's shields failed within seconds, and the ship buckled under the intense pressure. There was no time to evacuate. The ship was gone in an instant. Silence followed. No alarms, no cries of panic, just the cold, eerie quiet of space. The warship floated there unscathed, and yet its message was clear. The Empire's might meant nothing. Not here, not now. Inside the warship, the captain stood motionless, staring at the screens. The transmission had gone out. The Empire had been sent a warning. And now, the next phase of the plan would begin. The tension within the Empire was reaching a boiling point. In the Senate halls, leaders who had once been certain of their power now whispered in fear. Governors began to speak of surrender, of the Empire's inevitable collapse, and in the shadows of the capital, a different kind of resistance was stirring, one that had long been waiting for the Empire's foundation to crack. But it wasn't just the ship that was terrifying. It was the knowledge that humanity had survived, that after all this time, they were finally back. The warship continued to hover, silent and still, its presence a looming shadow over the heart of the Empire. The destructive power it had demonstrated was overwhelming, and now the Empire's fleet was fractured, disoriented. The once proud Imperial commanders who had ruled over entire star systems with a force that made the galaxy tremble now found themselves paralyzed by fear. They had underestimated their enemy. They had thought themselves untouchable. But now, as the warship drifted in the silence of space, they realized the terrible truth. This was not a mere skirmish. It was the beginning of the Empire's reckoning. Within the command center of the Imperial fleet, officers scrambled to make sense of the situation. The great wall of holographic projections that once displayed the Empire's mighty fleet was now a chaotic blur of blinking red alerts, disintegrated ships, and shifting enemy coordinates. It was as though the very fabric of their empire was beginning to tear apart. In the farthest reaches of the command room, a senior officer looked at his screen, his face pale with shock. "Your Eminence, the fleet is in disarray. Communications have been severed to nearly half of our outer defenses. We're losing control." The Emperor's claws dug deep into the armrests of his throne, his eyes narrowing with fury. His once commanding posture had collapsed into one of barely restrained panic. "We cannot afford this. We cannot lose." Torrin stepped forward, trying to steady the shaking hand that gripped the datapad before him. "We need to act, Your Eminence. We must deploy everything we have. If this warship is truly human, then they are here to take the galaxy back by force, and they will not stop until they've torn down everything we've built." Kree's eyes flicked over to him, calculating the words. The weight of the situation was sinking in like a cold stone in his gut. "You think they want war?" "I think they already have it," Torrin replied grimly. "And they're not just after control of the galaxy. They're here to destroy the very heart of the Empire. They've already erased a third of our fleet. They're showing us that we are vulnerable, that the great Empire, with all its might, is nothing compared to the power they hold." Kree's fists clenched. He had seen victory after victory, crushed rebellion after rebellion, and had forged the Empire into an iron fist that no one dared challenge. But this was something different. It wasn't just a rebellion. It wasn't just another insurrection. No, this was something personal. The humans were coming back for vengeance. They were coming back because they had been wronged. And the truth was too terrifying to ignore. The Empire's arrogance, its blind pursuit of control, had left a wound deep in the galaxy that had now been reopened. Kree could no longer deny the reality before him. The humans weren't just attacking. They were fighting for something far deeper. They were fighting for the truth. Back on the warship, the crew continued their vigil, unmoving. The cold, mechanical hum of the ship's systems filled the air, its power resonating through the entire vessel like a heartbeat. Inside the darkened command center, the captain stood in front of the massive viewport, his face illuminated by the stars that flickered in the distance. He did not look at the screens before him, but rather into the void of space, as though searching for something beyond the reaches of his eyes. The crew was on edge, but there was no fear. The preparations had been made. The time had come. This wasn't just an invasion, it was a reclamation. Humanity had spent too long in the shadows, its legacy erased by the Empire's revision of history. Now it was time for the truth to come back into the light. The captain's thoughts were interrupted by the voice of his first officer, a woman whose cybernetic arm glinted in the dim light as she stepped forward. "Captain," she said, her voice low but resolute, "the Empire has deployed its full military strength. The fleet is on the move. They'll be coming for us soon." He nodded, his eyes still locked on the distant stars. "I know. And we'll be ready." There was no hesitation in his voice. The ship had been built for this. Every inch of its hull, every weapon system, every piece of technology had been crafted not for survival, but for one purpose: to make the Empire remember, to make them understand the price of their cruelty. "This isn't about winning battles," the captain continued, his voice steady. "It's about showing them the truth that they've buried for a century, the truth that they thought they could destroy." The first officer looked at him with understanding. "And we won't stop until the galaxy knows it." The captain turned to face the bridge, his gaze sweeping over the silent crew. "We're not just soldiers anymore. We're the last remnant of a people they erased, and we will remind them of who we were, of who we are." Back on Viral Prime, the Empire's military leaders were growing desperate. The once imposing fleet had been scattered. Their greatest warships had fallen without even a hint of resistance. Their finest soldiers were now isolated, scrambling to regroup and to understand just how it was that a single warship could decimate their entire force. Kree could feel the tension mounting within him, gnawing at his resolve. But as the hours passed, something else started to shift in the Empire's command. Fear had become a commodity, and it was spreading. What was once a proud, terrifying symbol of power, the Empire, was now a crumbling fortress. The soldiers whispered among themselves. Governors began defecting, sending silent signals to the rebels. There was an undercurrent of panic that began to boil beneath the surface. What once seemed unthinkable, surrendering to humanity, to a forgotten species, was becoming a whispered possibility. Kree watched this unravel in silence. He had known that fear was a tool. He had used it to break entire worlds, to force billions into submission, but now he could feel it creeping under his own skin. This wasn't just a rebellion, it was a reckoning. Outside, the warship continued its slow, deliberate advance toward the heart of the Empire, and with each passing moment, the Emperor's resolve weakened. The ship wasn't just a threat, it was a symbol of something much larger. It was the return of a past the Empire had chosen to forget, and it wasn't just about the ship, it was about what came with it, the history, the ghosts of a species the Empire had thought destroyed. They had not only underestimated their enemy, they had forgotten them entirely. In the heart of the Empire's Senate chamber, the whispers began to grow louder. Senators who had once been the loudest voices of support for the Emperor were now questioning everything. The truth about humanity's legacy, the truth that the Empire had buried, was starting to leak out. Some of the senators, those whose seats had long been secured by the Emperor's iron fist, began to show signs of wavering loyalty. Others, more ambitious, began to speak of betrayal, of what might happen if the warship's demands were ignored. The message was spreading as it had been designed to. Slowly but surely, the Empire was starting to fracture. Inside the warship, the captain stood at the helm, looking at the vast expanse of stars. The final confrontation was near. They were not just fighting for control of a planet. They were fighting for something that could not be destroyed by firepower. They were fighting for truth. "We're ready," the first officer said, her voice sharp, eyes burning with intensity. "We've waited a century for this moment. Let's finish what we started." The captain gave a single nod. "It's time." The Empire had once believed that its strength was unquestionable, that its grip on the galaxy was ironclad, and that no force could challenge its dominance. But now, as the warship continued to glide through space, the heart of that illusion was cracking. What had once been the proud military machine of the Empire was now a shell of its former self, scattered and divided. In the cold silence of the command center, the tension was palpable. The Emperor could feel the weight of it in his chest, heavy and suffocating. Kree stood before the expansive holographic display that showed the positions of his remaining fleet. The once formidable Imperial warships, which had filled the vastness of space with their imposing presence, were now reduced to a handful of scattered vessels. crippled by the onslaught of the human warship's power. The glowing red dots on the display, signifying the enemy's remaining forces, seemed to mock him. They were everywhere and nowhere at once, always a step ahead, never vulnerable. "Report," Cree demanded, his voice strained with anger. The communications officer, who had been working feverishly to maintain some semblance of order in the chaos, looked up, his face pale. "Your Eminence, we've lost contact with the outer sectors. The fleet is in disarray. We cannot regain full control." Kree's claws clenched, his golden eyes flashing with fury. "No one leaves this room until we have a plan." His voice thundered, a storm of rage and fear. "I will not let this ghost ship bring the Empire to its knees. The galaxy is ours. It has always been ours." Torin, who had been standing in the shadows of the room, his face lined with worry, stepped forward. "Sire, the warship, it's not just about destroying us, it's more than that. It's a declaration. The ship has already spoken. It's showing us how weak we truly are, and they know it." The Emperor turned to face him, his eyes narrowing dangerously. "Weak?" he spat, stepping closer to the High Marshal. "The Empire does not bow to threats. We destroy them. We crush them underfoot." Torin's voice was calm, but tinged with concern. "I've seen the reports from the front lines. We can't keep fighting like this. The warship, it's not just a weapon, it's a message, and it's forcing us to reckon with something we've ignored for too long. The truth." Cree recoiled at the word. "Truth?" he repeated, his voice low. "What truth?" "The truth that the humans have been watching, waiting," Torin said, his gaze unwavering. "We've always believed they were gone, but they never disappeared. They just hid. And now they've returned, and they're not just here to fight. They're here to remind us of what we've forgotten, that the Empire is built on lies, on the destruction of entire species, on the theft of worlds and histories. We built our power on the bones of others." Cree turned away, unable to meet Torin's eyes. The words were like daggers, stabbing into the very foundation of everything he had worked to build. The idea that the Empire, the great unstoppable empire, might be built on a lie was too much to bear. The weight of history pressed down on him, suffocating him, pulling him into a place he didn't want to go. "We are not weak," Cree growled, forcing himself to regain control. "We will destroy them. We have to." But even as he spoke, a part of him knew the truth. They were not the ones with all the power. They had been shaken, unnerved, and there was nothing more dangerous than an enemy who had caught you off guard. The Empire might have controlled the galaxy for centuries, but it had never been tested in the way it was now. It had never faced a reckoning. Meanwhile, aboard the warship, the crew was preparing for the final push. The air was thick with anticipation, and the ship's sensors hummed with readiness. The captain stood at the helm, his eyes fixed on the display, showing the Empire's fractured fleet. The remnants of the Imperial forces were trying to regroup, to find some semblance of order, but it was too late. The warship had already done its job. The Empire had been brought to its knees. "All systems are operational," the first officer reported, her voice steady but filled with the gravity of the situation. "Weapons are ready. We're in position to make our move." The captain nodded, his face etched with years of struggle, of loss, of survival. "Good," he said, his voice low. "We're not just here to destroy, we're here to remind them of what they did, of who they buried." He turned away from the control panels, his gaze drifting to the rest of the crew. They were silent, focused, their eyes filled with a shared understanding. These were not just soldiers. These were the last of humanity, the remnants of a people who had been cast aside by the Empire, erased from history. They had lived in the shadows for too long. Now they would come out into the light. Now the Empire would be forced to see the truth. The captain took a deep breath, his voice rising with quiet intensity. Prepare to broadcast. Every system, every frequency. The message must go out to every corner of the galaxy. Back on Viral Prime, the Senate was in turmoil. The once proud institution that had upheld the Empire's authority for centuries was now on the brink of collapse. The message from the human warship had sent shockwaves through the political sphere. Whispers of rebellion, of defection, had begun to spread like wildfire. Some senators, once loyal to the Emperor, had begun to question everything they had ever known. Was the Empire truly invincible? Had they too been deceived? The room buzzed with voices, each one clamoring for attention, each one filled with a mixture of fear and uncertainty. There were no simple answers now. The threat posed by the human warship was too great to ignore, but the implications of that threat were far-reaching. If humanity had survived, if they were still out there, then everything the Empire had built could come crashing down. In the midst of the chaos, one figure stood silent, unmoving. Senator Alana Varys, a veteran of the Imperial Senate, watched the proceedings with a cold, calculating gaze. She had always been loyal to the Empire, but she had also seen the cracks in its foundation. She had seen the growing discontent among the people, the whispers of rebellion in the outer systems, and now, with the return of humanity, those cracks were widening. Her eyes flickered to the holographic display showing the warship hovering above Viral Prime. The ship was still there, its silent presence like a dark omen. It was a symbol not just of military power, but of something deeper. It was the reminder of a past that the Empire had tried to erase, and now it was returning, not to reclaim a lost world, but to reclaim the truth. Senator Varys stepped forward, her voice cutting through the noise in the Senate chamber. We cannot ignore what is happening. The human warship is not just a military threat, it is a political one. If we do not act, if we do not respond with the force that the Empire is known for, we will be nothing more than a memory, a footnote in the history of this galaxy. Her words resonated in the room, and a hush fell over the senators. Some nodded, agreeing with her assessment. Others, more cautious, glanced nervously toward the Emperor's loyalists. The balance of power was shifting, and no one could predict where it would land. I suggest we do what we have always done, Senator Varys continued, her voice gaining strength. We respond with force. We do not show weakness. We remind the galaxy that the Empire will not be cowed. But we must also recognize that this is not just a battle of armies. It is a battle for truth, and that is something the Empire has never been good at. Her words lingered in the air, charged with meaning. The Empire's leaders had always prided themselves on control, on manipulating history, erasing the inconvenient truths. But now, with the return of humanity, those truths were no longer something they could ignore. The captain of the warship stood before his crew, his face grim but resolute. The final transmission was ready. The galaxy was about to hear the truth. We're not just here to fight, he said, his voice steady. We're here to expose what the Empire has done. And once the galaxy knows the truth, nothing will ever be the same again. The warship's engines thrummed as it prepared for the final broadcast. Its hull shimmered in the void, a haunting silhouette against the distant stars. The captain stood before the crew, his eyes filled with the weight of the moment. The next few hours would determine everything. This was not just a confrontation. It was the return of a lost people, a reckoning. It was the moment the Empire would learn the cost of erasing humanity from history. The captain gave a single nod, and the order was given. The crew moved swiftly, their fingers flying across the consoles, transmitting the signal through every frequency to every corner of the galaxy. They weren't just broadcasting a message to the Empire. This was a declaration to everyone, every colony, every system, every person still living under the Empire's rule. The truth was about to be revealed. Back on Viral Prime, the Senate chamber had descended into chaos. Senators shouted across the room, pointing fingers, questioning each other's loyalties, while the Emperor's advisors scrambled to maintain control. The Empire's might had been shaken, but its leaders were still clinging to the illusion of power, refusing to accept that the warship was something they could no longer ignore. Emperor Kree stood tall at the center of the room, his face a mask of fury and disbelief. "What do we do?" he barked to his advisors, his voice barely containing his rage. "We cannot let this stand. They are nothing, just a broken remnant of a failed species." Tauren, standing at the Emperor's side, looked at him with solemn eyes. "Sire, they are more than that. They've proven themselves to be far more than we anticipated. We can't fight this battle the way we fought the others. If we continue down this path, the Empire may fall." "We will not fall," Kree growled. "We will crush them. We'll burn them from the galaxy." Tauren didn't answer, but his gaze shifted to the screen, showing the warship's movement, unrelenting and steady, as if it knew victory was inevitable. A sense of dread settled over him. The Emperor could continue to deny the truth, but the reality was becoming impossible to ignore. Humanity was back. In space, the warship's transmission reached the farthest reaches of the Empire. A single haunting image was broadcast to every station, every outpost, every fleet. It was a face, familiar yet unfamiliar, old, weathered by time and hardship, but with a certain fire that no amount of suffering could extinguish. The face of someone who had seen the worst the galaxy had to offer, but had never backed down. The message was simple, but its weight was impossible to ignore. It was a reminder, a warning. "We never left, remember." The words burned across every screen in the galaxy, on the Imperial Capitol, in the Senate, in the command rooms of the military. The message echoed. A wave of realization hit. The Empire had been living a lie. The humans had not disappeared. They had been watching, waiting, and now they were here to reclaim their place in the galaxy. For a moment, there was silence, heavy, deafening silence. Then came the whispers, the murmurs of doubt spreading through the ranks. Even the loyalists who had sworn fealty to the Emperor for years began to waver. The truth had been revealed, and now it was up to the people to decide whether they would continue to follow the Empire's reign of lies or join the truth that was now demanding its place. The Senate was in turmoil. Senators who had once been unwavering in their support of the Emperor now found themselves questioning everything they had believed. Some who had felt the stirrings of rebellion for years now saw an opportunity to turn against the Empire. Others, more loyal to the throne, stood firm, insisting that the Empire's military might would crush the insurgents. But even the most loyal Imperial officers couldn't ignore the tremors of fear that rippled through the Empire. Governors, once proud and confident in their position, began to distance themselves from the Emperor. Military leaders began questioning their orders, and whispers of defection spread like wildfire. The once unshakable unity of the Empire was beginning to unravel. At the heart of it all was Krei, who stood before his court, struggling to maintain control. He barked orders at his officers, but his words lacked the weight they once carried. He had been a ruler of fear, a master of destruction. But now, for the first time in his reign, he faced something far more powerful than his fleet, something that couldn't be fought with weapons or soldiers. It was the truth. Back on the warship, the captain watched as the galaxy responded to the broadcast. The Empire's fleet, scattered and disoriented, began to lose its cohesion. The truth was spreading like wildfire. The human warship was no longer just a symbol of military strength. It was a catalyst for revolution. The message had reached the farthest reaches of the galaxy, and humanity had reclaimed its place in the stars. "Is it time?" the first officer asked, her voice calm, yet filled with anticipation. The captain nodded. "It's time." They had done what they came to do. The Empire's lies had been exposed, and the galaxy now saw the Empire for what it truly was. An empire built on destruction, built on the bones of those it had crushed. The humans weren't just fighting for survival, they were fighting for their legacy, for the truth. The captain turned to his crew. "This isn't just about battle, this is about remembrance. We're not here to conquer. We're here to show the galaxy the strength of truth, and no matter what happens next, the Empire will never be the same." Back on the imperial capital, the Emperor stood alone in his throne room, his claws dug into the stone throne as he looked out at the view of the city below, his mind racing. The galaxy was no longer under his control. The humans were back, and they had exposed everything he had worked so hard to build. For the first time, the Emperor understood the true cost of his reign. The warship, still hovering above Viral Prime, had made its point. It had shown the galaxy the truth, and now the entire Empire was in turmoil. The rebellion was not just against his rule, it was against the very foundation of the Empire itself. And he couldn't stop it. In the end, Kree's empire didn't fall in a great, explosive confrontation. It didn't collapse under the weight of a single battle. No, the empire fell slowly, one defection at a time. Governors abandoned their posts, fleet commanders surrendered their ships, and eventually the Senate, once the stronghold of the Emperor's rule, fractured under the weight of the truth. The last of the imperial fleet scattered. The warship continued its silent vigil over the capital, watching as the Empire disintegrated beneath its weight. Humanity had returned, not as a victim, but as a force the stars would never forget. And so, the Empire crumbled. But humanity's return was just the beginning. The galaxy would never again be the same. It would be a long road, but with the truth now in the open, the stars had no choice but to remember. We never left. Remember. The story ends here, leaving the future open to the rise of a new order, a new balance of power in the galaxy. Humanity's legacy had been restored, and the Empire would never again stand unchallenged. The warship, though no longer in sight, would forever remain in the minds of those who witnessed its return, a symbol of both humanity's past and its future. The galaxy had been reminded of its forgotten history, and the price of ignoring the truth was steep.